I'm Dave O'Riordan. I'm the founder of Silver Six. We're consultants that help IT departments significantly and measurably improve internal customer satisfaction with IT. When was the last time you ran an IT customer survey? What sort of response rate did you get? What changes were implemented as a result? I'm guessing it's been quite a while since you ran your last survey. You got a pretty low response rate when you did, and that not much changed as a result. In this slidecast, I'm going to explain why IT customer surveys are essential and then describe a new and better way of doing them. A way that's easy to implement, customer friendly, and that can readily become the cornerstone of your continual service improvement efforts. So why is it essential to survey our customers? Because, as IT professionals, we're frequently guilty of omphaloskepsis. Omphaloskepsis literally means contemplation of one's navel, i.e. navel gazing. It's easy for us to get complacently self-absorbed, and we forget the primary reason we're here is to provide value to our customers, which is where customer surveys come in. Customer surveys help us understand how our customers perceive us. And as the lean movement tells us, customer perception of value is everything. Is your IT department seen as dynamic and a pleasure to deal with, or as inflexible and hard work? Surveys are also important because they help you to avoid the trap of being perceived as providing declining service over time. If you've ever read about the Kano model, you'll remember that customers expect us to improve over time. Things that excite them today become basic expectations tomorrow. The upshot of this is that even if your objective performance measures are static, measures such as service availability and incident response and resolution times, customers may perceive that things are getting worse. You have to keep improving service just to maintain satisfaction. Sitting still is in essence going backwards. I think you'll agree that IT customer surveys are essential. So, in the remainder of this slidecast, I'm going to tell you why traditional customer survey methods are inadequate, about a better method of surveying customers called Net Promoter, and finally, how IT can adopt and apply Net Promoter in place of more traditional methods. Traditional satisfaction survey methods suck, and there are at least 5 reasons why. Firstly, they have too many questions. This is often because too many people have contributed their pet questions in the survey design process. And as surveys get longer, design and analysis costs go up, response rates drop, and sample sizes shrink. Secondly, traditional surveys also tend to ask the wrong questions. They ask about what is important to IT, not what is important to the customer. If you've ever completed a long online survey only to find that you weren't given an opportunity to share what you wanted to share, you'll know what I'm talking about and how infuriating this can be. Thirdly, the results of traditional surveys, while they invariably involve fat PowerPoint decks and pretty charts, do not tend to tell us what we actually need to do to improve service. This is the "so now what" problem. If you need a statistician to interpret the results, or your staff don't know how to take corrective action, your survey is ineffective. The fourth reason that traditional methods suck is that there are no generally accepted standards. The questions asked differ, and the grading scales used are inconsistent. This means that performance cannot be compared across organisations. And finally, because surveys can be time-consuming to devise, a burden to customers and hard to analyse, we simply don't run them often enough. Fortunately, there's an alternative approach that we can borrow from that doesn't have any of these drawbacks. This alternative approach is called Net Promoter. But what is it? Net Promoter is an established customer loyalty metric and approach developed by, and a registered trademark of, Fred Reichheld, Bain and Satmetrix. It is used by thousands of organisations, big and small, around the world to survey their external customers. The approach was introduced by Reichheld in his 2003 Harvard Business Review article called The One Number You Need to Grow, and he elaborated on this in his book, The Ultimate Question. Note though that although Net Promoter is a registered trademark, its actual use is unrestricted. We're free to use it. At its core is a survey that involves just 2 questions. The first question is this: on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? And it is always followed by a question that asks why. Although the actual wording may vary, the follow-up question is a free-form question that prompts the customer to explain what it is they like about the product or service and what they don't. The Net Promoter approach is so well established now that many organisations you deal with every day are already using it. Core companies like Facebook, and more traditional companies too. The first question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend us, enables us to calculate a Net Promoter Score. The Net Promoter Score, NPS for short, can be used to monitor performance over time as well as benchmark performance against other organisations. Fortunately, the beauty of Net Promoter is that it is very simple to understand, and the Net Promoter Score calculation looks nothing like this. Instead, it looks like this. A Net Promoter Score is calculated by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. But what are detractors and what are promoters? Detractors are people who responded with a score of 6 or below. These are people who feel quite negatively about the brand and who are probably publicly sharing that negativity. For example, I'm a detractor of Lenovo's because of all the problems I've had with my Lenovo laptop and the hassles I've had every time I've had to make a claim. On the other hand, promoters are people who give a score of 9 or 10, and these are people who are very happy with the brand and who are consequently very loyal. As an example, I'm a promoter of AAMI, the insurer of my car and home. And I'm a promoter because of how well I've been treated whenever I've needed to make a claim. Sitting in between promoters and detractors are passives. These are people who sit on the fence. They are the ones who give a score of 7 and 8. This might seem like a high score, but it's been shown that these people would change brand if a better offer came along. For example, I'm a passive when it comes to Budget Rent-A-Car. They gave me a bright pink car the last time I used them. It wasn't great for my ego when I turned up at the conference, but I'll still use them again if the price is right. But if another car hire firm has a better deal for me, I'll use them instead. By the way, when we calculate a Net Promoter Score, we ignore the passives, the fence sitters. Let's look at a simple example. If we get 10 responses to a Net Promoter survey, 2 of which give a score of 6 or less, 5 of which score 7 or 8, and 3 of which give 9 or 10, what's our Net Promoter Score? You probably worked out that it's plus 10%. 3 out of 10 were promoters, which is 30%. 2 out of 10 were detractors, which is 20%. 30% less 20% is plus 10%. Remember, we always ignore the passives. The Net Promoter Score is very powerful for benchmarking purposes. Here's an example from a 2009 study that showed the relative perception that Australians had of the high street banks. The Bendigo Bank was the only bank who had more promoters than detractors. They were the only ones with a positive score. At the other end of the scale, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia looks like it has a lot of room for improvement. Although they do seem to have come up with a rather novel way of satisfying their customers. So apart from some Australian banks, who is using Net Promoter? Well, as you can see, it has been adopted by a wide range of national and international organisations. Let's take a look at how one of these organisations uses it. Apple provide a great example of how Net Promoter is more than just a metric. Apple's retail stores use Net Promoter on a daily basis. If you buy something from an Apple store, you'll be asked for your email address at the point of sale. You will then be emailed a Net Promoter survey. If you give a score of 6 or less, i.e. you're a detractor, the store manager will call you within 24 hours to see if they can make things right. Employees who create promoters are recognised by their managers and, in some stores, are asked to share their promoter-making behaviours with the rest of the team. Meanwhile, Apple is able to benchmark store performance against others in the region and is able to collate and analyse all customer feedback in order to understand the underlying reasons for customer satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So far, we've talked about how Net Promoter is used by forward-thinking organisations to listen to their customers and act on that intelligence. But how can we apply that thinking to an IT department with internal customers? Well, the first thing we need to do is to change the wording of the first question. We need to do this because the customers of internal service departments are beholden. They usually have no choice of service provider, and there's no point in them recommending their IT department to a friend or colleague. We therefore recommend that you change the likely to recommend question to one that is more relevant. On a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you is a far more relevant question for an internal customer of IT. With the question reworded, we recommend you survey in two distinct ways: a transactional survey and a relationship survey. Let's look at both. A transactional survey is one that you trigger every day as and when your customers interact with your IT team. The perfect time to do this is when their support ticket, an incident or request in ITIL terminology, is closed. At this point, email the Net Promoter Survey asking something along the lines of, on a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with the way your support call was resolved? And don't forget the important follow-up question, why did you score us that way? IT service management tools are usually able to automate the transactional survey for you. Like Apple, if you're serious about improving customer satisfaction, you should always call detractors. This has multiple benefits. It gives you a chance to turn them around. It gives you a chance to learn more about the cause of their dissatisfaction. And it shows that you are listening. I recently gave Lenovo a 3 out of 10 on their Net Promoter Survey, and it made me even more angry when no one contacted me to try and make things right. On a more positive note, when you get a high score from a customer, it's a great idea to share their feedback with the team so everyone can learn from it. The other way IT can use Net Promoter is in place of the traditional periodic survey. This type of survey can be run 6 monthly or annually and seeks to understand your customer's overall perception of IT, rather than their experience with a particular transaction. At the agreed interval, a Net Promoter Survey can be sent to all of IT's customers asking something like, on a scale of 0 to 10, overall, how satisfied are you with IT services? We like to use SurveyMonkey to run relationship surveys, but there are lots of other tools out there you could use. You could just as easily add a Net Promoter Survey to your intranet. With relationship surveys, it is critical that you do more than just calculate your Net Promoter Score. You should read all the responses and identify the most common positive and negative themes. You should plan what you're going to change in order to build on those positives and address those negatives. And you should close the loop by communicating the findings and improvement plans with IT's staff and customers. The Net Promoter approach is simple, but there are a few pitfalls to be avoided. Firstly, apathy. Most people are surveyed out. They're fed up with surveys. If you want your customers to respond to your Net Promoter surveys, the fact that the surveys are short is not enough. It's critical that you act on the feedback you're given and thoroughly communicate the changes that the survey has led to. Offering prizes for survey completion is fine, but demonstrating that the method is actually improving IT service is a much better incentive. The second thing to avoid is anonymity. By capturing the name of the responder, firstly, the quality of the answers given to the question, why did you score us that way, is increased. You tend to avoid the because IT is rubbish type of response that leaves you none the wiser. Secondly, you have the opportunity to ask for clarification where feedback is unclear. And finally, of course, because you have the responder's name, you get the opportunity to resolve the detractor's issue by talking to them about it. The final pitfall I wanted to mention is gaming, and by gaming I mean the deliberate attempt to influence the scores that customers give. This can be especially prevalent when Net Promoter Scores are linked to employee reward systems. Let's take a look at an example. Here's a real-life covering letter that accompanied a survey sent to a client of ours by an internationally recognised IT vendor. I highlighted 3 different places where there was a deliberate attempt to procure a higher score. Have a look. They even highlighted the very satisfied response in green to make it stand out. Although the survey wasn't a Net Promoter survey, it's a great example of gaming. By now, if you've made it this far into the presentation, you've hopefully seen that Net Promoter is a powerful tool for continually monitoring IT customer perceptions and for driving continual improvement. Let me finish with a quick recap of why your IT department should implement it, and then suggest a timetable for doing just that. So, why should you implement it? 1. It is simple to implement, and even the most IT illiterate executive or board member can understand it. 2. Customers like it because the surveys are short and don't annoy them with irrelevant questions. 3. The follow-up question results in feedback that is readily mined for themes and that can be relatively easily linked to improvement actions. Customers tell you what's important to them. You don't need to guess. 4. The Net Promoter Score is benchmarkable. Because the scale and calculation is standard, scores can be compared over time, across internal service departments, and between disparate organisations. Finally, you don't need a survey design consultant to design your survey. You don't need special tools to run them. And you don't need a statistician to interpret the results. There really is no excuse for not giving it a go, especially those of you who can't remember the last time IT ran a survey. So you're keen. What next? Firstly, I recommend you read Fred Reichheld's latest book, The Ultimate Question 2.0. This updated version of his book goes into greater depth than the first version and will give you some insights I haven't had the time to share in this presentation. I then recommend you focus on implementing transactional surveys in your IT service management or help desk tool. As part of this, I strongly recommend calling detractors. And with transactional surveys in place, you can then focus on implementing your first periodic relationship survey. And don't forget to close the loop and widely share the findings and plans for improvement. The only real impediment to implementing Net Promoter style relationship surveys will be persuading your peers to drop all those extra questions. Perhaps sending them this presentation would help. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this presentation interesting and useful. This has been Dave O'Riordan of Silver Six.